Blackman, who joins us now from Aberdeen. Good morning to you. It isn't a windfall tax, but it is in all but name. Let me ask you what you think about that. We looked at the IFS's projections of how this will impact the least well off. Presumably you support what the Conservatives have done, do you?
So we've been calling for a windfall tax for some time. In fact, Kate Forbes and Ben McPherson suggested this in 2020. The disappointment is that they've chosen to focus it entirely on oil and gas companies when they could have done it on all of the companies that have had a super profit during the course of the pandemic. I mean, why should the Amazons and the Sercos of this world get away scot-free? The other issue with the windfall tax is that 90% of that money that is being generated is generated from income made in Scotland. And actually, it feels very unfair that Scotland is having to pay for the entirety of the UK. If Scotland was an independent country, the windfall tax would generate £1,800 for every household in Scotland. So it feels like we are paying the price for the Chancellor's failings here.
But in theory, I mean, we're looking, the bottom line is that the poorest in society are going to be significantly better off as a result of this. In principle, you support that, do you?
I'm really glad that the Chancellor has made a U-turn, has decided, he stood up in Parliament earlier this year and said, wonderful, we're going to give everybody £200 in a loan for energy and this will solve all of the problems. That was never going to solve all of the problems. So I'm really glad that he's come back to Parliament, made a change and decided to target it particularly on people who are on universal credit, who are in legacy benefits and who are disabled people on disabled benefits. That is good news. However, he failed to uprate the benefits. So this is just sort of kicking the can down the road. We are still seeing that those benefits have not been uprated. Scottish Government did far more in terms of uprating the benefits that we are responsible for.
But it means people are no worse off.
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are no worse off, actually, because the £20 a week universal credit cut that was made last year, the Women's Budget Group have been clear that a lump sum of £600 is less than the £20 cut that was made last year. And that £20 uplift was put in place in 2020, when actually we weren't seeing this massive increase in cost of living that people are currently facing. So I don't think it goes far enough, and it's a one-off. It does not solve
Well, we just heard from Craig Hoy it wasn't.
Years.
Are you worried that the oil industry is going to be hit? You're speaking to us from Aberdeen this morning. Do you think they will have a crisis of confidence in terms of working here?
I think it's unfair to focus it entirely on the oil and gas industry, and we've said that all along. We've said that companies like Amazon and Serco and supermarkets that have made lots of money during the course of the pandemic should also have been targeted with this super profit tax, if you like.
Listen, your government's got its own economic worries at the moment as well, hasn't it? On Tuesday, Kate Forbes is going to set out her spending plans for the next 4 years. And the IFS, in another study this week, reckons there's a £3.5 billion black hole in your budget. You're short of money to the tune of £640 for every person in Scotland. Your opponent's suggesting that's because you've mismanaged the economy at the moment. What is she going to do to get out of that black hole? Is she going to put up taxes? Is she going to cut spending, or is she going to spend it and cross her fingers that Westminster sends more money up here?
Well, this is a spending review that is coming this week. It's not a budget. And what we're going to do is we're going to lay out that within the limited powers and the limited means that we have, what our priorities are within those resources. And contrary to the Conservatives, we've got a plan. We have got priorities. Our priorities are that we're going to tackle child poverty, we're going to help with the cost of living, we're going to grow our economy, and we're going to support the public sector. And that's what Kate Forbes will stand up and lay out this year. Well, do you know what? It is the case that actually, given that so much of our budget relies on what happens at Westminster, and given how uncertain that is, given the fact that our budget is decreasing in real terms this year because of Westminster's decisions, absolutely, things are difficult.
What would you be doing if we were independent now? What would you be doing, your government be doing, to get us through this crisis? Would you be taxing people to raise revenue? Would you be cutting spending, going back to austerity, or would you be borrowing?
We have talked about the fact that the windfall tax should have been broader than that. We would be looking at levying taxes on a broader basis on all of those companies that have had super profits. We would be doing what we've said in terms of benefits. Our benefits would have been uprated by much closer to inflation, and that would have provided significant additional help for people. We would be doing what we have done all along, which is acting as a progressive government.
But getting the money from where? From increasing corporation tax on wealthy companies, thereby potentially discouraging them from coming here to do business?
Well, as I already said, the windfall tax on oil and gas, 90% of it is from Scottish companies. So we could raise £4.5 billion doing exactly the same windfall tax that the Chancellor has.
Okay.
But actually, if you look at what the Chancellor is doing, if you look at the fact that he's, raising this money from the windfall tax, he's failing to recognise the fact that the OBR said earlier this year that he's got £30 billion of fiscal headroom where he can still meet his fiscal targets. Why does he think it's more important that the government has this extra £30 billion in the bank, if you like, rather than putting it into people's pockets, rather than making a difference for people that really, really need it right now?
OK, let me tell you where your government is going to need some more money right now as well, aren't you? Because you're going to have to find a load more for public sector workers who are inevitably teachers, bin collectors, all these kind of people are going to come back to you now and say, look, if you're offering the train drivers 4.2%, where's ours? The teachers have rejected 2%. They're all going to come back to you now, aren't they?
This is, again, a really big failing in the way that the budget works. So we've had Westminster austerity, we've had Westminster continue to squeeze the public sector, and that means that the consequentials that we get in order for us to spend for the Scottish budget are less than they should be. That's why our budget is decreasing in real terms. We're being very clear, and Kate Forbes was clear earlier this week, that the Chancellor has failed the public sector in the announcements that he's made. He should be recognising the fact that the NHS, that people working in public transport, that everybody working in the public sector had to step up during the course of the pandemic.
This is your problem. As a result of that system, this is still your problem. What are you going to do about it? Bearing in mind also that the Governor of the Bank of England has said absolutely clearly that the solution to this problem is not to give everybody big pay rises, because that will just hike inflation.
The spending review is coming on Tuesday, and you will see Kate Forbes stand up and let people know what we're going to do.
Do teachers have a right to ask for 4.2%? Do care workers have a right to ask for 4.2%?
I think it's completely understandable that people are looking at the inflationary pressures that they are and thinking, gosh, our salary is not going far enough. That is across the board.
So will you try to give them a rise that helps with that?
People, whether they are working in the public sector, whether they are unemployed, whether they are working in the private sector, are not seeing the inflationary increase in salary that we need to see. Part of actually what would solve that problem is for the Westminster government to increase the living wage to an actual living wage, which again they have failed to do. And that would mean that companies would have the responsibility to increase the wages of people so that they can actually afford to live.
Last question. Is there a kind of storm brewing of industrial unrest in the months ahead?
I don't think there's a storm brewing of industrial unrest. I think there's a storm brewing of general unrest. I think people, despite what the Chancellor has done, despite standing up there, I think people are going to be feeling the pinch very, very much. And that's why during the spending review on Tuesday, we're going to be focusing on the cost of living. We're going to be focusing on reducing child poverty. We're going to be focusing on growing our economy, and we're going to be focusing on supporting the public sector.
All right, Kirsty Blackman, many thanks indeed for your time on the Sunday show this morning.